Hey guys, in this video I want to talk about an issue that's been plaguing Overwatch from its very release back in 2016 and has arguably been worsened in Overwatch 2. Every year, Overwatch players tend to have a very particular idea on how the game should be balanced and what the meta should and shouldn't be. And by the way, this video was inspired by Gregor's recent video on R6. So I think it's good to begin with the fact that Overwatch right now is actually in a pretty solid balance state. Whenever I try to rank heroes from last to first, the gap between each hero is almost non-existent. Even though we're likely heading into a dive meta, we've seen a whole bunch of heroes and comps being played, from the Winston dive, to the Reinhardt brawl, to one team playing Pharah, and even a few teams playing Reinhardt. And of course, Sigma being played on ranged maps too. It's of course impossible to balance all the heroes in such a way that each one is equally picked and they all have exactly the same run delta, but the fact that we're not seeing one comp being played everywhere is at least a promising sign. There's always been the issue of heroes being good at lower ranks and not being very good at higher ranks, and Reinhardt is a pretty good example of such. In the recent Overwatch League Pro-Am, teams who played Reinhardt like the London Spitfire struggled heavily against well-oiled Ramattra teams, yet Reinhardt ends up receiving a nerf heading into Season 4. And that's solely because he's overperforming for the average player. I think if the devs want to make heroes like Moira and Torb picked more at the higher ranks and picked less at the low ranks, then they need to lower their value floor and increase their value and skill ceilings. But I don't think this is an issue at all. It's good for accessibility that easier heroes like Moira and Torb exist as long as they don't affect the higher ranks that much. It helps new players acclimate to the very fast pace of a game like Overwatch, especially when we're in a market that there's not very many beginner friendly games, where games like Valorant and Rainbow Six Siege are good examples of such. If anyone's touched those games, like I have, you know that it's pretty tough as a new player. And it's not even all black and white. Heroes like Torb, Reaper, Soldier, Bastion, Reinhardt, and other heroes that we'd consider newer players to start off playing, the value ceiling of those heroes still allow them to be played at the pro level or in the higher ranks in niche situations. And they also still require a decent bit of skill to play at the pro level too, either mechanically or game sense wise. And this is good because it means that pros, or anyone for that matter, don't cry about low skill heroes being meta. Unfortunately, this doesn't really apply to Moira, who doesn't really require much skill to get value out of anyways, at least in a team environment where you're not on your TikTok DPS shit, but that's fine considering Moira's value is pretty low at the moment. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have heroes like Kiriko being borderline broken in top 500 and at the pro level, but she's not broken for the average player. So what do you do as a developer here? Because if you nerf Kiriko to please the pro players, then your casuals are gonna complain because the hero that they love playing when they got home from their 9 to 5 shift is completely useless and hard to play. How do you balance Kiriko in a way where she's still fine in the average ranks, but not broken in top 500s? In other words, pleasing both the casual and competitive community. Well, that's pretty simple. Nerf the parts of Kiriko's kit that the competitive community are using properly and that the casual community aren't. In other words, what separates a top 500 Kiriko from a platinum level Kiriko? And the answer in this case is teleport usage. A top 500 Kiriko just knows when they should push the limits of their TP, hard flanking and holding angles by themselves, then teleporting straight back to their team if they're in danger. And you'll constantly see this with Kiriko players at the top level, especially when she's played with dive, because angles are really important in that comp. That means that if you nerf, say, the distance at which you can teleport from, or you increase the teleport cooldown, or you add a longer cast time, or you added some damage vulnerability effect after you had used the TP, it would impact the higher players without affecting the lower ranks, because lower rank Kirikos aren't using their teleport properly anyways. They're busy healbotting their tank from main, missing all their kunais, and then panic with regards to using their teleports. Decreasing the teleport distance from 30 to say 20 meters doesn't affect the average player, but it does affect the top end of play. It means for the sweaty Kiriko player, they have to be a lot more conservative and thoughtful as to how far they can hard flank and stray away from their team, and it also means they have to be smarter about how they flank. Now that's an easy solution for Kiriko, but what about someone like Ramattra? What separates a plat Ramattra from someone who's in top 500s? Now that's a bit more difficult to break down, because the average Ramattra player gets most of their value with their Nemesis form, which is also the same case with the top 500 player too. If you nerf his pummels, you'd also be affecting the casual player base as well as the higher ranks. Of course, balancing would be easy and this wouldn't be an issue if I were to assume that Ramattra is also overperforming for the casuals too, but considering there were no changes to him in Season 4, I doubt that's the case. This isn't Hog where every single part of the community are complaining about the one-shots. That's relatively easy to fix. just lower his value ceiling by nerfing the one-shots. I guess in Ramatra's case, you could change his block, because from my experience, a lot of bad Ramatra players don't know how to use his block, but a lot of high-level Ramatra players know exactly what they're doing with this block, interweaving it with bursts of damage, blocking once they've lost armor, and they overall have better HP management. Perhaps reworking block to a one-time use, or having it function like a Diva Matrix, could raise Ramatra's skill ceiling and decrease his value ceiling too. But perhaps heroes like Ramatra don't even need balancing, because halfway across the world, professional Overwatch coaches in Asia are putting heroes like Ramatra, Lucio, and Baptiste in C tier, and also stating that Sigma is the best tank in the game. So you can kinda see how complicated balancing is for the devs, and the predicament that they're in. And Overwatch is kind of a special case because whilst there has always been regional differences in playstyle and hero choice across every game, like Rainbow Six Siege, we've never had quite a divide like Overwatch to where Dive is meta in Asia and Brawl is meta in the West. So why is this? Why is it tough for Overwatch players to come to a general consensus on what heroes are good and bad, not just between your casual Andes and the competitive player base, but also between regions too? Well, I unironically think it's a skill issue. Just think about it. Why don't you see Dive in your games? Well, that's because it's hard to play. It requires efforts. You need to spend time taking flanks, then once you've done that, you need to actually coordinate a dive with good timing, whereas in Brawl, the value floor is just much more forgiving. And it's also a lot more simple to understand. You just press W and run it down. In fact, a lot of Western contenders teams got away with that back in Overwatch 1. It's the path of least resistance. It's easy to do. Clicking heads is also a path of least resistance, for the pros at least, where you have these geeked up zoomers drinking G Fuel and Prime in their rooms, sweating out Kovacs every other hour, and shouting sheesh as soon as they get a kill. But the casual player base just can't do that. There's a clear skill gap between the casual and competitive player base there, but this isn't me demonizing the casual player base for just not being good enough. In fact, when the Overwatch meta is just head clicker simulator, the game is boring to play and boring to watch as an esports. There's hardly any strategy involved, any strategy unique to Overwatch. If you want to see head clicker simulator, then go to any other modern FPS on the markets. Alternatively, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have metas like GOATs, which can also be boring for the average player, mostly because of the visual clutter. Who actually understands what is going on here? Or even what's going on here? Even myself as a coach, who spent 3 years analysing this game, I find this shit confusing and tiring to go through. Having to go into the replayer's Kefi style on 0.25 speed to figure out that one Suzu dictated how an entire fight went is boring and needlessly petty. It's basically League of Legends but first person at that point. Not to mention, Overwatch is fundamentally a casual game, like it or not. This game isn't Valorant. It wasn't made to compete in esports. And even look at the content scene. One of the best videos I ever made in terms of its writing and in terms of the editing got fuck all views. And I'm not really surprised because no one cares about the esports scene. I think people like myself and I think the competitive player base need to become more self-aware. When we talk about the dichotomy between the two player bases, no matter the game you play, someone is always going to make it competitive. But that doesn't mean it's an inherently competitive game. It's why when people like Samito and Flats were overreacting to the brig change, I was confused. You guys do realise who this change was intended for, right? And that's not an excuse for the devs to add in dumb, overpowered changes for the sake of pleasing the casual player base. But people forget nuance. People forget that you can have a balanced, fun, and yet powerful mechanic in the game. Pulse Bomb is a good example of that, and so is the New Valley. It's fun walking around with a fat shield and a stun, but that can also be balanced too, which I think it is. In my opinion, and hopefully in the opinion of many, Overwatch is at its best when it hits that perfect balance of MOBA elements like League of Legends, as well as the traditional elements of FPS shooters like CSGO, Valorant, COD, and Rainbow Six Siege. I think 222 helped a lot with this, because before 222, you either had 5 DPS in your games playing CSGO, or you had the entire team playing League of Legends with GOATs. With Overwatch, it's important to go straight down the middle. Players want a little bit of mechanics and a little bit of MOBA. And personally, I think they've hit this sweet spot quite well, unlike last year, where Jungle Queen reigned for 2 months straight, and then Winston, Kiriko, Lucio dominated for the following 2 months. Regardless of their issues though, heroes like Sojourn, Jungle Queen, Kiriko, and Ramatra are welcome additions to the game. And that's me speaking selfishly as a content creator, because those kind of heroes can create new dynamics or gameplay loops that I can talk about and teach to people either when I coach or when I create content. And maybe, eventually, if shit gets too crazy and there's power creep, maybe we can finally add in a hero ban system. This video isn't gonna answer or fix all the dichotomies that Overwatch has, and who's to say that they need fixing in the first place, but I think they're interesting to bring up anyways. Shout out to my tier 1 Patreons, Tyler Bishop and Remy Kane, and that's it for the video. Bit more of a discursive one here, so let me know your thoughts down below. Until next time.